Fair representation of First Nations people is long overdue.
Representation of the Cherokee Nation in Congress will open a Pandora's box of issues.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark, and I am very happy to be your host and moderator for today's program. So glad you tuned in to today's discussion. You haven't met our panelists yet, and I'd like for you to do so. So we'll go around the table, we'll ask them to introduce themselves, tell a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest and canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington.
My name is Bishop Michael Olson, and I serve as the Bishop of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Dan Levin. I'm the Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Tony Matthews, and I'm the Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Welcome, everyone, to today's discussion. Very glad you could be here. I know you've taken time from your busy schedule. You have other lives than just on the town hall. Although you see us here every week, they come from various backgrounds. As they've introduced themselves, you've learned they've come from different religions, points of view, perspectives, and that's what makes this town hall so special. So thank you for joining us. Let's get right to our discussion. Despite centuries-old treaties promising them the right to do so, no Native American nations have ever seated delegates in the Congress of the United States. According to the New York Times, the Cherokee Nation is now attempting to do so. A treaty signed in 1785 first gave Cherokees the right to send a deputy to Congress. Half a century later, in 1835, the Treaty of New Echota, which incidentally removed Cherokees from their eastern homelands, granted them the right to send a delegate specifically to the House of Representatives. Now, almost 200 years later, the chief of the Cherokee Nation wants to hold the U.S. to that commitment. With about 400,000 enrolled members today, the Cherokees are the largest of nearly 600 recognized nations within the community of Native peoples. If the Cherokee delegate is seated, he or she would be among a small group of non-voting members of the House, including delegates from Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, the Virgin Islands, and several Pacific islands. The Times called the Cherokee effort part of a larger push for Native visibility and representation that has included the 2018 election of 4 Native Americans to the House, 2 Democratic women and 2 Republican men, from the Pueblo, Ho-Chunk, Chickasaw, and Cherokee nations, respectively. The Cherokee effort brings fresh to our minds the mostly sad history of relations between the United States and the people who populated the continent prior to the country's formation. Today, I would like our panelists to consider at least these 3 questions. What stake might religious groups have in the Cherokee Initiative? There is often talk within the African American community of reparations for slavery. Might relationships with Native peoples warrant the same sort of consideration? And then thirdly, what are the practical implications of one Native nation being represented in Congress and not at all? Well, thank you again for being here today for this discussion. You've met our panelists. We're ready to get into our discussion. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program. Dr. Trovall, welcome to the program. More thoughts on your opening statement, please.
Sure. In your commentary, your initial statement, it talked about the mostly sad history. It seems nearly completely sad in so many ways. in the history of the United States, just the overwhelming and the pushing off of land of Native Americans, the killing of Native Americans. And to me, this initiation by the Cherokee to go back to the treaty and to look at it and then to suggest having a delegate to be added to the Congress of the United States seems like, because it was initiated by the Cherokees themselves and it's also in the treaty, it seems like an incredible kind of step to at least bring awareness, to educate, to bring a voice to the Congress about the needs of the First Nations, and specifically the Cherokee. I mean, I think it's important that we all realize that there are 600 recognized nations, so this is not representative of all people who are Native American. But to me, a little bit of the history in my research, it's interesting that the Cherokee Nation was one of the 5 quote-unquote civilized tribes, which obviously is a patronizing comment, but it meant that they adopted colonial ways and colonial habits. They built log cabins, for example. In 1827, they formed their own government, and they used the United States Constitution as the basis of their government. It was only then 11 short years later that they were then forcibly removed from their native land and pushed off to Oklahoma. So strangely enough, they adopt so much of the colonial ways, the ways of thinking, and they fought on both sides of the Civil War too. So in some ways, they are so ingrained in American history, the Cherokees are, that to me, to have a delegate and to draw back to this treaty, to have the delegate representative there seems to me to be just the right thing. It's initiated by them, it's a voice, and it's educational, and I just think it's an important thing. I think it's a wonderful step.
All right, thank you very much, Reverend Plumbley. You also made an opening comment. Can you please expand your thoughts?
Certainly. I don't agree with, don't disagree with anything that Dr. Trovall has said, except that I would add to it that there are a lot of very practical needs in the Native communities that this sort of delegate can help, can make visible, and can speak to, and can be, roaming the halls of Congress to help people to understand the great health needs that are the needs of the Indian Health Services Organization, the great needs for education on reservations, and the general neglect that we have had. I think of, when do we ever see or hear about Native peoples? It's usually when we're trying to take more of their land. It's usually when we're trying to run a pipeline through some sacred territory. It's usually when we're trying to say, well, yeah, this reservation, we reserved this land for you folks, and yeah, it has no. You can't grow anything there, and it's not very valuable land. But the value that there is there, we want to take that. And then folks that are not living on reservations, there are so many different needs that they have as well, and as they try to maintain their cultural identity within the whole of the United States. My statement was simply that there are so many different cultures, so many different tribes, so many different groups that fall under this general umbrella of the Native peoples, that it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, and if we can do it in a way that even approaches justice.
All right, thank you very much, Rabbi Levin. Welcome to the program. Your thoughts on the subject, please.
I think it is so complicated and difficult to figure out how you unravel injustice. If we take a look at the fact that this year we are marking 400 years since we first imported people from Africa to work as slaves, and that the entire economy of the United States was built on the back of slave labor. How do you remedy that injustice? You look at what happened to native peoples as Europeans and those from other lands came and conquered this territory that we call the United States. How do we remedy centuries of injustice? It's so difficult to figure out how to do that because on the one hand, there is this sense that there is an injustice that needs to be remedied. On the other hand, there is a sense there's a society that we can't completely unwind at this particular moment in history. And so I think about what it means for us to be a people. Who do we want to be as a country? What makes us us? And in some measure, we used to think that in order to be America, we needed to create a melting pot where people would take all of their cultural differences and they would all blend away and we would come up with some kind of unifying sense of Americanhood. And now we, I think, rightly have moved to an idea more of a mosaic, and recognizing that what makes America such a beautiful thing is the fact that there are so many different cultures and peoples with different histories. And so I think that if we can figure out how to move forward so that there is uplift and empowerment for Native peoples, I think that's the best course of action. How that's to be done, I think having a delegate in Congress is probably a step, but I'm not sure it's the only step.
All right, thank you very much, Bishop Olson. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you. It's a complicated problem, and I think it's one of those things, too, where it's so complicated, it's almost like, if we touch it, are we going to make this worse? You know, I mean, I think especially for those who've been most harmed by it. And I mean, I just think that's a good, prudent question to ask. One way is just simply, too, it's why just the Cherokees, you know, and what is the Cherokee experience of today? And it's like our experience, everyone's own experience that is having of life today in the United States is very different than it was in 1827. In a sense, we're affected by life as it develops and unfolds here. And so what are the practical needs that aren't being addressed? We can only address historical injustices in the present moment as they are presently experienced as injustices. And because we can't turn back time. And then also it's just, what about injustices perpetrated within the Native peoples? I mean, you know, between the Cherokee and the Apache, or the Apache and, you know, and the Comanches here. I mean, very different, still part of history, very different cultures, and something that we are able to amalgamate only because we don't share either of those particular cultures. And I think it can add to more confusion, and it becomes an empty symbol unless it's followed by action, which involves participation. You know, America is always, the United States, as we've defined ourselves for years, it's a uniquely modern state in the sense that it's based on an idea and principles, you know, and not on racial imbalance, you know, and our ideals and principles have helped us get away from the racial imbalance and the way people form tribal identity and other types of identity. And so what does that do now to our ideas of that make us Americans, that make us citizens of the United States?
All right, thank you very much. And Canon Peterson, glad you're here today. Your thoughts,
well,
please.
Thank you. I think that the chief of the Cherokee Nation, Chuck Hurkins, would respond to you, Michael, by saying it is time for the United States to keep up its bargain, end quote. And certainly they have done that insofar as that they have already appointed, or they have announced a person by the name of Timberly Teeley, who has been appointed to be the first delegate if and when that happens. Now, the problem here is in relationship to the treaty, because the treaty itself says, and I'm going to quote it, it is stipulated that they, the Cherokee, shall be entitled to a delegate in the House of Representatives of the United States, and here comes the problem, whenever Congress shall make a provision for the same.
Right.
And so the issue here is that the chief of the Cherokee Nation is saying, we would like now to cash in the chips. So to speak. You know, it's time for you to live up to your treaty, and that's why we want to have a delegate in the United States House of Representatives. And so I think that what we have here is a very interesting phenomenon, indeed holding up to the American principles. And 185 years later, it is time for this actually to take place. Now, the moderator has asked a very important question in number 2, which I just want to speak about, the whole issue in relationship to reparations. And should we be thinking about reparations? And I think that your topic is very helpful here. And should reparations warrant the same type that is now being done here in the United States in relationship to the African American community? Of course, it's not being done here in relationship to the Indians or to the Native Americans. But the thing I want to point out is that indeed Canada is doing that. And they're making reparations to their native peoples, and the church is very much involved in that.
All right, thank you very much. And Dr. Matthews, welcome to the program, and your thoughts on the subject.
Well, I'm willing to take 40 acres from anybody. Okay. I think was it 1865? The mule, I believe, came later. You're right, 40 acres of the mule. I'm willing to take it. I think I agree with the earlier comments that this is more complicated than meets the eye. I think it is, as our brother Carl mentioned, that it's a great step, it's a good step in the right direction. And I think everyone needs a voice. I have more questions than answers with this. When I read here that that this person is going to be seated among a small group of non-voting members of the House. I'm going to research more. I know you guys probably have on the non-voting.
They're non-state.
They're non-state people who have voted.
Well, how will they fully be represented? I mean, if
it's not full representation.
And that's my problem.
It's like if you've ever seen a license plate from the District of Columbia,
right,
that says taxation without representation. It makes very clear that people who live in the District of Columbia are taxed and are not represented, at least with a voting representative. So this is the same thing.
No, it's not. I see those license plates nearly every day of my life, right. And the subject actually is debated very, very vigorously from where I come. And so, yeah, it's true. There are states issues, and then there are the territories and everyone else. So it's part of the discussion. And I think,
I just had only one point. I think what makes this significant is that it's not the United States government going and asking the Cherokee Nation, hey, we'd like to have a representative, almost in a patronizing. It's initiated by the Cherokee Nation, which I think is really critical in this because it's a movement. It's a movement from the people themselves to the government and calling upon the treaty. I think this is really significant, that initiation point, as a way at least to begin and to have a voice. I mean, some of that delegatory power is the voice that you get.
And I think that's the key to voice. And I'll quickly mention, of course, this took me on the path of looking at reparations, which is a really hot topic still in the African American community. Of course, there are those who say that this would be a financial nightmare and a logistical nightmare. But I just read an article. It's very well written, and it's such a different article than many of the other ones I've read on reparations. And it's titled, "A Radical Plan for Black Reparations. 7 New Majority Black U.S. States." I'm not saying that I'm not endorsing it, nor am I opposed to it. I'm going to read it some more, and that may be something that we can maybe talk about one day on our program.
Could be a future subject.
Is would this work? You know, it's interesting, and for me, it was a bit intriguing as well.
Canon Peterson, we just have a few seconds left.
Yes, I just want to say that first thing you should read is what Georgetown University is doing in their reparations and how they're handling the situation, which is a very interesting model to follow.
And Reverend Plumbley, last statement here.
And there are parallels for that sort of reparation within the educational community with what's being done with Native peoples.
Yes.
Or people who have Native ancestry.
Thank you very much. This has been a very good discussion, and I believe we'll have to come back to this. You're right, Dr. Matthews. We may come back to this subject sometime soon. But until then, there's an important announcement I'd like for you to hear. We'll be back in just a few moments for the summary statements from our panelists.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. Thank you for standing by and for listening to that important announcement. And I agree with Mark that you can go to the website there and find a lot of very interesting things there about the Town Hall, the history. Learn about the Town Hall Estates especially. Wonderful organization of compassionate, caring people. And then also, we want to encourage you to send messages regarding what you'd like to hear discussed on the program. Send us your ideas to the address that Mark has put on the screen for you. Now we're going to go to our summary statements. Let's go to Canon Peterson. You're first.
Yes, there's been a great deal of discussion around the table today about the complications that this would cause. Well, I would argue that the complications were caused by our ancestors to the Cherokee people. And the complications certainly are complications that we have to work out because of what we have done to the Native Americans. And it's also important that exactly when this treaty was being signed, President Andrew Jackson was literally throwing the people out of Georgia, along with the governor of Georgia, and moving them.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Rabbi Levin?
I think Abraham Lincoln described America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And I think that when there are significant numbers of people who have no representation, then we cannot claim to be that kind of government.
Amen.
Dr. Trovall, your summation, please.
I want to add to John's comment. It was 4,000 of 16,000 people died on that trip from Georgia to Oklahoma as well. And this is obviously not going to solve the issue of reparations, but to me what's powerful is that it's initiated by the Cherokee Nation. It gives the Cherokee Nation voice, it gives them visibility, and in that way it gives visibility to all of our country about the importance of their needs and what their goals are.
All right, thank
Native
you.
peoples.
Thank you very much. Now, Dr. Matthews, your summation.
Yeah, I love Native Americans, and I really hope that they have a seat at the table and a voice and that full representation.
All right, thank you. And Reverend Plumbley, your summation, please.
Thank you. There's a meme out there that shows a Native American man on horseback, and the caption above and below his picture says, "So you're telling me you believe Hebrews are entitled to the land of Israel because their ancestors once lived there?" Which, if you unpack that, just says so much about what is owed the people who once lived here, once populated this land.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Bishop Olson, your summation, please.
Yes, very good like this. It's never so long. I know stretch. Here we are. All right. I think representation does begin with a voice. All right, and I think that's very important in this issue for Native Americans, precisely because of their history and how it has been affected adversely in many ways by the history of the United States. I think also more needs to be known already about what is the relationship currently, thing like the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the reservations, the history of that is overlooked and ignored by the general public and certainly in our history books. I think that in itself can come more clearly through a voice granted as a delegate in our Congress. So I think that's a very good thing. The issue of reparations is another complicated issue, which is, I think, again, begins with a voice and begins then from a voice to articulate what are the current effects of historical injustices, but then also what have been benefits that people assess as having been received in the current situation. I think there are some, and I think though those need to be clearly articulated by those who have that voice.
All right, thank you. This has been a very informative discussion around this table. And for the viewers at home, perhaps there's someone from one of the nations that would care to drop us a line. We would encourage that. Tell us what your thoughts are on the subject. I don't know that there are any Native Americans here or First Peoples here on this particular panel. I don't believe so. But on the other hand, we know that there may be a viewer or many viewers who have tuned in for today's program. We encourage and appreciate your thoughts and your opinions. It would be very informative and very insightful. This is how it's done here at the Town Hall. As we say, anyone may appear and you may state your purpose, your perspective, your point of view, and that is why we are here and have been here for the past 6.5 decades plus. So we appreciate your support and your tuning in. And before we go, I would encourage you to go to the website, and there you can learn about the Town Hall Estates especially. We don't say a tremendous amount about the Town Hall Estates because we're knowing that you're going to the website, right? So when you get there, you can learn about the history of the Town Hall and of the Town Hall Estates. And we appreciate your support. And when you get to know us, I think you're going to love us and come back the next time too. Thank you for being here today. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over this very same channel, or however you tuned in today, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.